China's economic miracle has been the single most important geopolitical event that shaped the first 20 years of the 21st century. In a span of just 30 years, China went on to become the second biggest economy in the world. But it's not the end of the story. In fact, this is just the beginning. In the relentless pursuit of global supremacy, there is another force that has risen from the east. And this reckoning is giving countless sleepless nights to China. You guessed it right. We are talking about India and its astounding rise. Up until the 1990s, India and China had comparable economies. Or should we say that they were equally poor? However, as we have stepped into the third decade of this century, these countries are no longer comparable. China's economy is 5 times that of India, its defense budget is 4 times, and its foreign exports are more than 5 times that of India. But this video is not about the past, and neither is it about how China raced ahead of India. No, this video is about the future. This video is about the evident ascent of India and why China is so afraid of India's phenomenal growth. In this video, we are dissecting China's relationship with and fear of India from two different lenses, the economic lens and the geopolitical lens. Chapter 1: China's economic fear. China's economic fear stems from the rapid growth that India has observed over the last couple of years. This fear gets even more daunting as India's rapid growth is coming at the same time when China is witnessing its rapid decline. We have a separate video on how India's economic boom is occurring and another one on how China's economic miracle is ending. Do make sure to watch these videos right after this one. India has already become the fastest growing major economy in the world, overtaking China. In the year 2022, India's GDP growth rate was 7%, while China's GDP grew at a mere 3%. India is projected to grow at 7% annually from the year 2023 till 2030, whereas China's annual growth is projected at just 4% for the same period. Then comes the factor of demographic dividend. In the year 2023, India surpassed China to become the most populated country in the world. Not only this, India has the world's largest youth population, with over 600 million people under the age of 25. In comparison, China's population is expected to peak in the year 2030 and then is expected to continue the downward trend till at least the end of the century. This would mean two things. Firstly, India will have a larger pool of potential workers and consumers. And secondly, a larger number of elderly Chinese population would be dependent on very few young Chinese. Both India and China have a youth unemployment rate hovering between 20% to 25%. But because China has a smaller pool of younger population, this problem gets even more unnerving for China. Let's also talk about the surge in middle class population in both the countries. China's middle class is expected to touch the magical number of 650 million by the year 2025. Which by the way will be equivalent to half of the total Chinese population. But India's middle class is also growing rapidly and it is expected to reach 583 million by 2025. The middle class will then make up 41% of the total Indian population, a difference of just 67 million. Let's also look at the exports figures. China's exports are expected to touch $4.4 trillion by the year 2030, whereas India's exports are projected to grow to $2 trillion in the same time. This would mean that the Chinese exports that right now are 5 times that of India would only be 2 times in size by the year 2030. China is especially afraid of India's growing manufacturing sector. This fear stemmed from the time when India dethroned China to become the largest two-wheeler exporter in the world. China's real manufacturing value is expected to increase to $5.7 trillion by the year 2030, whereas for India, it would be $1 trillion, growing at double-digit CAGRs. If India's manufacturing prowess increases, it is obvious which country would bear the brunt. Chapter 2: China's Geopolitical Fear. India's location at the heart of Indo-Pacific region places it in a pivotal position in terms of trade routes, naval access and geopolitical influence. This gives India an upper hand over China. A whopping 60% of China's overall trade, including 85% of its imported oil supply, passes through the very narrow Strait of Malacca. Through its Andaman and Nicobar Islands, India can potentially block China's access to this strait at any time if the situation demands. China knows this, and therefore it has done everything in its power to reduce its reliance on the Strait of Malacca. Firstly, China thought of developing strategic ports and naval facilities along the Indian Ocean periphery, a strategy often referred to as the string of pearls. India countered it through its audacious yet all-encompassing necklace of diamonds strategy. A major difference between the two being that India's policy has equal say and engagement of all the participating countries in it. Secondly, China decided to bypass the Strait of Malacca by devising alternative trade routes through its Belt and Road Initiative. India countered it by exposing China's evil plan of trapping small sovereign nations into its debt trap in front of the world. Initially, there were very few buyers of India's stance. But when China captured Sri Lanka in its debt trap, the world started listening to India and China's BRI had to go on the back burner. China is also fearful of India's democratic roots. It does not matter whether India is as democratic as the Western powers want it to be. There is no denying the fact that at the end of the day, India is still a functioning democratic nation. And despite no homogeneous culture and no homogeneous language, India has made its democracy work for a quarter of a century now. This democratic advantage gives India a common ground to establish deeper partnerships and alliances with other nations. India has actively sought to strengthen partnerships and alliances with key global players including the United States, European Union, United Kingdom, Japan, Australia, and the ASEAN countries. While China also has good relationships with some of these countries, their relationships have always been transactional in nature, never going past the bilateral trade aspect. Such is not the case with democratic India. Lastly, there is the question of South China Sea. China asserts historical claims over the entire South China Sea based on the ancient texts and maps. This includes the 9-dash line, a demarcation line that encircles much of the sea. But the reality is completely opposite. In the year 2016, an arbitration tribunal under the United Nations Conventions on the Law of Sea, UNCLOS, ruled in favor of the Philippines, rejecting China's claims in the South China Sea. But China rejected the ruling and instead started illegally occupying different islands of the sea. India has been a firm opponent of any such attempts by any individual nation to unilaterally alter the status quo of South China Sea. This includes activities like land reclamation, militarization of islands, and the declaration of air defense identification zones without international consensus. India places value on the certainty of ASEAN in regional affairs. It supports ASEAN-led forums and initiatives for addressing issues related to the South China Sea. The once unthinkable scenario of India not only standing up but also challenging China is now becoming a reality, reshaping the entire global landscape. And in this race, India is not alone. It has support from every nation, big or small, behind it. It is now as clear as the Himalayan water. The Indian juggernaut is unstoppable, and we recommend China to get out of its ostrich syndrome as soon as possible. Thank you for joining us on this eye-opening journey. For more riveting insights on global dynamics, don't miss our other compelling videos. Click the links on your screen and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Your gateway to a world in flux awaits.